Which is the worst single decision in history ever made by a person? The decision by the Scottish to invade England during Black Death must be up there. Alan Savory, the ecologist who 40,000 elephants because it was believed that grazing was causing the desertification of Africa, only to find out later that elephants were essential to prevent desertification. Now You See Me sequel not being called Now You Don't. Mao Zedong, pest campaign. He basically told his nation to take pots and pans to kill all the sparrows. However, the ecosystem was disturbed and the locust population skyrocketed. Seeds. He thought that planting seeds 1 meter in the ground would result in greater roots and better harvest. He also thought that putting tons of seeds in one compact area would cause a better harvest. All the seeds died, however. Around 30 million or so died from famine under his rule. Hey, look at the other nations industrializing. Let's smelt all our metal to build better infrastructure. What? It creates pig iron, which is super unstable and impure, therefore being ultimately useless. Oops. Mao. Eastman Kodak deciding not to go forward with their own newly invented digital cameras and instead sticking with film because it made them so much money at the time. Maybe the worst business decision ever made was by Xerox with their Alto computer. Xerox invented the graphical interface modern computers use. Desktop, folders, copy, paste, etc. They basically invented the modern computer in the 70s. But the problem was, the people in charge at the time were businessmen without any technical knowledge, so they didn't realize what they had. They did nothing with it and gave it away to universities and showed other companies. The famous story is that Steve Jobs saw this and within 5 minutes realized this was the way computers would work in the future. He copied it. Because Xerox didn't patent their invention and didn't do anything with it, and the rest is history. Xerox could have been Apple or Microsoft. Or both. They could have had a monopoly on the entire PC industry. Almost every company uses Windows in their offices. I think 80 or 90% of consumers uses Windows. That could have been Xerox. They had the tech maybe 10 years before anyone else. They could have been the most valuable company of all time, but they just gave it away. The guy that sold the bottling rights for Coca-Cola for $1 and never even made the guy pay the $1. Robert Ballard, one of the guys who discovered Titanic, says that his biggest regret is that he and Jean-Louis Michel didn't bring a piece of the Titanic up with him when he first discovered it in 1985. At the time, they didn't want to disturb the wreck and leave it pristine, but if they had done so, then they would have been able to claim legal ownership of the wreck under international maritime law, and therefore more control over it. Because they chose not to do that, everyone and their grandma is free to take artifacts and pieces of the wreck, and this makes preservation impossible. Maybe not the worst, but maybe Ronald Wayne. He was a co-founder of Apple along with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in 1976. Just 12 days after forming the company, he sold his shares for $800. He owned 10% of the company, which would be worth $80 billion today. Radcliffe Line, the process to divide India and Pakistan boundary in 1947 was done hastily and without major considerations to local populace religion. Radcliffe was not a geography guy and majorly messed up the process. Millions died. Not the worst in the world, but apparently my family owned a little town west of Kent, UK. My great-great-great-grandfather got plastered one night and gambled it all away, face with rolling eyes. Well, the decision of Inalchuq, the governor of the Khwarezmian city of Otra, to attack Genghis Khan's trade caravan was pretty bad. Khan was famous as a ruthless warlord, not the sort of guy you want to piss off, but maybe they could have got away with it. Genghis sent 3 ambassadors to negotiate a settlement, which is when Muhammad II, the Shah of Khwarezm, made the really bad decision to kill one of these ambassadors and send the other 2 back without their beards as a sign of humiliation. Genghis Khan was so enraged he assembled an army and destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, wiped out every town they had. He even rerouted a river to wipe out the village where the Shah was born, wiping it off the map. By 1120 there wasn't much of anything left. So, both Inalchuq or Muhammad II of Khwarezm qualify. Take your pick. Hey, let's create a coffee machine that uses a single-use plastic cup for every cup of coffee or tea. How bad can the trash from that really be? I actually read that the creator of the K-Cup, John Sylvan, regrets inventing the pod system. Alcibiades was considered a traitor in Athens for leading his men to death, a traitor in Sparta because he got the queen to cheat on the king with him, and a traitor in Persia after including him in a war. Kaiser Wilhelm II firing Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck had a plan. He always has a plan, but not when an incompetent Kaiser boots him out of his means of putting his plans into action. Bismarck had everything set up perfectly, but Wilhelm II decided to f up everything he had set up, and got into World War I for it. The Donner Party of 90 pioneers choosing to take a shortcut when heading west from Illinois to California in 1846. Said shortcut led to them getting trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains and resorting to cannibalism. Alright gentlemen, we've successfully fended off the Greeks for 10 years. Our great city of Troy still stands. If we keep this up, surely they will realize the siege is fruitless and return home before long. Yo captain, there's this big wooden horse outside. Oh rad, bring it in. Brutus decided to join Cassius in murdering the dictatorial tyrant, Caesar. The reason? They suspected his intent to become a king, which then started a chain of events leading to his adopted son Caesar becoming a military dictator without equal, having all the powers of a king without being called one. When this Caesar Augustus dies, his name and title is passed on for the next 400 years almost like you would a crown. Monarchies then returned all over Europe, in the style of Augustus Caesar, and so, the decision of Brutus to join the conspiracy in effect changed all of Western civilization for the next 1,900 years to adopt the very political style he wanted to avoid. It would not be until the 1770s when America and later France would begin revolting and experimenting with democracies and republics. Mao Zedong's revolutionary campaign, the Great Leap Forward, resulting in millions of people starving to death. Whoever said the world's biggest MMO RuneScape should remove the wilderness and free trade? They threw a literal fortune down the drain just because they didn't understand their own product. Thomas Midgley Jr. can lay claim to 3. First, he discovered and helped popularize the use of lead in petrol, gasoline, causing unimaginable harm to the atmosphere and our brains. He contracted lead poisoning when working on the project, but apparently neglected to draw any conclusions from this. Second, he led the team that discovered Freon, the first chlorofluorocarbon, and helped popularize the use of CFCs in refrigeration and industrial applications, causing further unimaginable harm to the atmosphere. It's suggested that he had a greater impact on the atmosphere than any other single person in history. As for the third, well, straight from Wikipedia. In 1940, at the age of 51, Midgley contracted poliomyelitis, which left him severely disabled. He devised an elaborate system of ropes and pulleys to lift himself out of bed. In 1944, he became entangled in the device and died of strangulation. The guy who rejected his Art Academy application. Sultan Murad IV sending the first flying man in history Hizarfen Ahmed Chelebi flying 3 kilometers over the Bosporus in 1638, into exile instead of putting all efforts into aviation. Henry Tandy, who supposedly spared Adolf Hitler's life during the war. The story is set on the 28th of September 1918, while Tandy was serving with the 5th Duke of Wellington's regiment, and relates that a weary German soldier wandered into Tandy's line of fire. The enemy soldier was wounded and did not even attempt to raise his own rifle. Tandy chose not to shoot. The German soldier saw him lower his rifle and nodded his thanks before wandering off. That soldier is purported to have been Adolf Me. When, against my better judgment, I opened a kennel to let 2 angry pit bulls out, their owner said, "Just let them out. They won't hurt you." Next thing I remember is being flown in a medical helicopter to the hospital, where I spent over 2 months and had 18 surgeries to repair the damage those dogs did. Yep, worst single decision in history, for sure. Gavrilo Princip shooting Archduke Franz Ferdinand. On that day, a man acted upon his self-constructed vendetta against a non-tyrannical monarch, thinking the world would remember him as a symbol against foreign tyranny, a symbol of national sovereignty. A year later, 10 million men were dead. Coming back Game 5 only to rupture your Achilles. In the beginning the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and being widely regarded as a bad move. Hong Xiuquan declared the typing rebellion after he had a nervous breakdown from failing the imperial examinations. He proclaimed that he was the brother of Jesus Christ. 20 to 30 million people died. My great-great-grandfather, a carpenter, did some work for a poor painter in the neighborhood. The painter had no money, so he offered either a bottle of wine or a painting. My great-great-grandfather chose the wine. The painter was Edward Munch, and the painting would have been worth millions upon millions today, or even just a few decades later if translated to today's money. Blockbuster not buying Netflix.